Ready to open the hood? UseTool for the tutorials.
And for car parts, the right idea is the Mr. Auto app. Easy, fast, and with better prices than on the website.
You can find the sash clutch used in the video under the link in the description. Turn your engine off. Pull up the handbrake. Pull on the bonnet release lever and open the bonnet. Take off the engine cover. Remove the airport cover. Then unclip and remove the plastic conduit. Remove the airport. Disconnect the air gap hose from the airbox. Unplug the connector on the airflow meter. Next, using clamp pliers, move aside the clamping clip on the air inlet conduit. Disengage the conduit from the airbox and remove the airbox from its slot. You can now remove the battery. Open the battery tray cover. Remove the first part of the battery tray by pressing on the retaining tabs and pulling on them. Never start by disconnecting the positive terminal with all the cars still connected to the minus terminal. This risks creating dangerous sparks in the electric network of your car. Using a 10mm spanner, start by removing the negative terminal from the battery. Once the terminal has been removed, ensure you distance the cable to avoid untimely reconnections, which could damage the electrical network of the vehicle. Repeat the operation on the positive terminal. To take out the battery, you will have to unscrew the holding plate. Using a socket wrench, an extension, and a 13mm socket, fully unscrew the knot that fixes the metal holding plate. You can now remove the battery. Using a socket wrench and a 10mm socket, unscrew the 3 screws holding the battery tray. You can now remove the battery tray. You now have access to the gearbox controls. Using a flathead screwdriver, remove the locking clips from the 2 gearbox control ball joints. And remove them. Move aside the selector lever to access the return lever locking clips. Then remove it. Remove the return lever using the flathead screwdriver. Using a socket wrench, a long extender, a gimbal, and a 13mm socket, unscrew the 2 retaining screws and the nut on the gearbox control holder. Then move aside the holder. With the vehicle on the ground, using a breaker bar and an M24 Triple square socket, unscrew the central driveshaft screws a few threads. Loosen the stud bolts on the front wheels. Lift the front of the vehicle. We strongly suggest watching the tutorial, raising your vehicle safely before carrying out this step. Place the vehicle on the axle stands. In order to change the clutch on your vehicle, you need to lift the front of the vehicle and remove the wheels to gain full access. You will then be able to take off the wheels. Don't forget to slide them under the vehicle. It is now time to get under the vehicle. Using a multi-bit screwdriver, a T25 Torx bit and a T30 Torx bit, unscrew the crankcase retaining screws. Then remove it. Changing the clutch requires to remove both drive shafts. The gearbox must therefore be bled so that the oil doesn't spill everywhere. You can now see the gearbox oil plug. Using a socket wrench and a 10mm Allen socket, release the oil plug and finish unscrewing by hand. Be careful on the last few turns, the oil can squirt out immediately. You have to anticipate by placing a container underneath to collect the oil. You can learn how to make one by watching another of our videos, how to make a collector for liquids. Let the oil run out for 10 minutes or so. Then screw the plug back on by hand first and finish tightening using the tool without over-tightening. You now need to remove the lower mudguard on the driver's side. Using a pry bar, remove the plastic rivets holding the mudguard by prying on the central part. Using a T25 Torx screwdriver, remove the screws holding the mudguard. And remove it. You now have access to the driveshaft retaining screws on the gearbox. Finish removing the driveshaft screws. To remove the driveshaft, you need to stop the disc from rotating. Insert a thin flatted screwdriver that can slip in between the two sides of the disc. Next, loosen the 6 screws that hold the driveshaft to the gearbox using an M24 Triple square socket. Rotate the driveshaft and immobilize it as you loosen the screws so that you can easily access all of them. Brush the 3 nuts holding the suspension ball joint and spray them with penetrating oil. Unscrew the 3 fixing nuts on the suspension ball joint using a socket wrench and a 16mm socket. Disengage the ball joint from the control arm. Then remove the driveshaft from the hub. You now need to remove the 6 screws holding the driveshaft to the gearbox, as well as the 3 half-moon spacers. You can now remove the driveshaft. Repeat the same operations on the passenger side until the driveshaft has been removed. Using a crowbar, stop the flange shaft from rotating. Now unscrew the flange shaft retaining screw using a socket wrench and a 6mm Allen socket. Then remove the flange shaft. Using a socket wrench and a 16mm socket, unscrew the 2 screws holding the anti-tipping engine mount. Next, using a socket wrench and a 21mm socket, unscrew the last screw holding the anti-tipping engine mount to the engine bed. Then remove it. Using a socket wrench and a 13mm socket, unscrew the nut holding the metal holder fixed to the lowest starting retaining screw. Then move aside the metal holder. Using a socket wrench and an 18mm socket, unscrew the low starter retaining screw on the gearbox. To access the upper starting retaining screw, you need to unclip the sleeve cylinder from the clutch release bearing. To do this, lift the hydraulic hose retaining clip using a flathead screwdriver. Then pull on the hose. Then plug the hose to avoid spilling brake fluid. Now lift the clip holding the slave cylinder to the clutch release bearing. Then remove the slave cylinder. Move aside the starter protective sleeve. Remove the electrical connectors from the starter. Next, using a socket wrench and a 13mm socket, unscrew the nut holding the negative terminal of the starter. Then remove the terminal. You can now unscrew the nut holding the ground connector to the upper starter retaining screw. Then remove the ground. Using a socket wrench and an 18mm socket, unscrew the upper starter retaining screw on the gearbox. Remove the starter. Unclip the reverse sensor. You now need to support the crankcase with a jack and a large rubber buffer so as not to damage the crankcase in order to rest against the engine when removing the engine mount on the gearbox side. Using a socket wrench and an 18mm socket, unscrew the 3 screws of the engine mount on the gearbox bracket. Then unscrew the 3 screws of the gearbox bracket using the same tools. Then remove the bracket. Using a socket wrench, a gimbal and an 18mm socket, unscrew the 2 upper retaining screws of the gearbox. On the passenger side, unscrew the gearbox retaining screw by the flange shaft using an 18mm socket. Then unscrew the 2 lower retaining screws using a 16mm spanner. Next, unscrew the last retaining screw using a socket wrench and a 16mm socket. The gearbox is now free. Shift it outwards to completely disengage it from the engine block before lowering it. Don't hesitate to ask for help from a friend to remove it, as it is heavy and difficult to handle. You can now view the clutch of your vehicle. Put 1 screw back on that connects the gearbox to the engine block. Install a 9mm ring spanner on one of the screws of the clutch mechanism to stop it from rotating. Then unscrew the 6 screws using a socket wrench and a 9mm triple square socket. You can now remove the clutch mechanism and disc. You can now see the flywheel. In some cases, it is crucial to change it at the same time as the clutch. To unscrew the 6 screws holding the flywheel, you need to stop it from rotating. There are several techniques. Install one of the screws that connects the gearbox to the engine block. install the 16mm ring spanner between one of the flywheel centering pins and the previously installed screw. Then loosen the flywheel retaining screws using a breaker bar and an M24 Triple square socket. You can also use the specific flywheel locking tool, which is highly recommended for installing the new flywheel. You can also unscrew the screws using an impact wrench, which will save you from having to stop the flywheel from rotating. Once the screws are unfastened, remove the flywheel.
All parts used in this tutorial are supplied by our trusted partners. These partners also help us create as many video tutorials as possible. Check them out in the description below.
You can find the complete sash clutch kit used in the video under the link in the description. Before installing the flywheel, you need to clean the contact surface of the flywheel on the engine block with brake cleaner and a piece of tissue, as it is contaminated by clutch disc dust. You also need to clean the two centering rings thoroughly with a wire brush, which will make it easier to reinsert the gearbox. Fit the new flywheel. There's only one position, which allows the openings to be aligned with the screws. You must install the new screws supplied in the kit, as they are single-use expansion screws. Roughly screw them back on. Take this specific flywheel locking tool and install it so that you can finish tightening the flywheel retaining screws. The first tightening phase is carried out using a torque wrench, following the tightening sequence shown in the video. You can then move on to the second screw tightening phase by adding the recommended torque angle. Next, remove the locking tool. Before installing the new clutch, remember to clean the contact surface of the flywheel with a piece of tissue onto which you've sprayed brake cleaner. It is strictly forbidden to spray the dual-mass flywheel with brake cleaner, as the part is not waterproof and the cleaner could penetrate the internal mechanism where there is specific grease on key components. The sash clutch kit for this vehicle features X-Trend technology, self-adjusting clutch. This technology compensates for the increasing play that is created with the wear of the clutch disc, guaranteeing a constant release force over time and optimal comfort. This clutch kit must be installed using a compression tool like the one used in the video. Otherwise, the part will be damaged and will not fulfill its function. Take the clutch alignment system and install it on the clutch disc from the side where the gearbox side is written. Take the assembly and install it on the flywheel. Do not hesitate to double-check the direction of assembly for the disc with the words gearbox side. Clean the flat surface of the clutch mechanism in contact with the clutch disc with brake cleaner and a piece of tissue. Install the clutch mechanism on the flywheel by positioning it on the 3 centering pins on the flywheel. Take the 3 fixing screws for the compression tool and install them in place of the clutch mechanism retaining screws. Take the 3-pointed star, then screw the hollow stop screw onto it. Install the clamping handle on the assembly. Take the assembly and install it on the clutch alignment system and the tool fixing screws. Then lock the assembly by installing the locking nuts. can now screw in the thrust screw until it comes into contact with the diaphragm blades. Continue to press the diaphragm to bring the clutch housing closer to the flywheel. Press the diaphragm until the clutch mechanism comes into contact with the flywheel. Take the mechanism fixing screws included in the kit and screw them until they make contact with the fixing points which are not used by the tool fixing screws in order to hold the mechanism in position when removing the tool. The clutch mechanism is now attached to the flywheel. You can now decompress the diaphragm. Then remove the tool. Unscrew the tool fixing screws. Install the remaining clutch mechanism fixing screws into the fixing points previously used in the tool. Finish tightening the fixing screws in a staggered manner using the torque wrench. The clutch is now correctly installed. You can now remove the clutch alignment system. When you change your clutch, it is also important to replace the clutch release bearing. Using a socket wrench, an extender and a 9mm socket, unscrew the 3 screws of the clutch release bearing and remove it. You now need to clean the inside of the crankcase as it is lined with dust and particles from the old clutch disc with brake cleaner and a piece of tissue. Clean the transmission shaft using brake cleaner and a piece of cloth. Use the grease included in the kit, then grease the transmission shaft. But don't use too much grease, because if the grease spreads out, it may affect the clutch's efficiency. Don't hesitate to wipe off excess grease with paper towels. Get the new clutch release bearing. Please note, it is strictly forbidden to press the clutch release bearing spring. Pressing the bearing when empty will damage the internal seals of the part, causing irreversible damage even before the stop has been installed. Install the bearing on the transmission shaft. Then tighten the 3 screws gradually until they make contact. Finish off the tightening with a torque wrench. The entire clutch kit is now in place. You will have to insert the transmission shaft into the clutch disc cavity. Once again, we advise you to get help for this operation in order to insert the gearbox as straight as possible so that the transmission shaft does not push too hard on the clutch disc cavity, as this could damage it. You can then screw in the 3 lower gearbox retaining screws. Finish off the tightening with a torque wrench. Then screw back the 2 upper screws. Finish off the tightening with a torque wrench. Put the gearbox bracket back onto the gearbox. Then screw the 3 retaining screws back on. Finish off the tightening with the torque wrench. Put the 3 engine mount screws back onto the gearbox bracket. Then screw them back on. Finish off the tightening with a torque wrench. You will then be able to take off the jack. Reinsert the starter into its slot. Then screw the 2 retaining screws back in. Finish off the tightening with a torque wrench. Reconnect the reverse sensor. Put the negative terminal of the starter back on. Then screw the nut back on. Reconnect the electrical connectors of the starter. Put the starter protective sleeve back on. Put the ground connector back onto the starter retaining screw. Then screw the nut back on. Screw the metal holder back onto the lower starter retaining screw. You now have to bleed the clutch system. Open the brake fluid reservoir. You have to start by draining the used liquid with the help of a pump. Then fill the reservoir with new liquid to the maximum level. It is strongly recommended to drain the used brake fluid found in the clutch system. To do this, immerse the hose previously connected to the clutch slave cylinder in a canister. Then pump on the clutch pedal to remove used fluid from the system and avoid contaminating the new clutch release bearing with the old brake fluid. Clip the clutch slave cylinder back onto the clutch release bearing. Lock it. Clip the clutch system hose back on. Then lock it. Install a bleeder hose connected to a canister on the clutch slave cylinder drain screw. Open the drain screw using a size 13mm spanner. Then pump the clutch pedal. It is important to regularly add brake fluid to the reservoir to prevent air from entering the system. When there are no more bubbles escaping from the cylinder, screw the drain screw back on. Then remove the hose. Close the brake fluid reservoir. Once bleeding is complete, the pedal becomes hard, flexible, and returns easily to its initial position. Put the anti-tipping mount back in place. Then screw the 3 screws back in. Finish off the tightening with a torque wrench. On the driver's side, take the drive shaft. Put it in position against the gearbox. Insert the drive shaft into the hub. Place the control arm back in the control arm ball joint. Screw in the 3 nuts holding the control arm on the ball joint and finish tightening with the torque wrench. Put the spacers and screws back in place and tighten until they make contact. Finish tightening the screws using a torque wrench, once again using the drive shaft immobilizing technique. Then screw the drive shaft screw back on until it makes contact. You can now use the drive shaft immobilizing technique again and carry out the first drive shaft screw tightening phase with the wheel suspended using the torque wrench. Install the last screw, holding the gearbox onto the engine block. Then screw it back on. Finish off the tightening with a torque wrench. On the passenger side, put the flange shaft back in place. Then screw the retaining screw back on. Finish off the tightening with the torque wrench. You can now put the drive shaft back in place by repeating the same operations as on the driver's side. It is now necessary to refill the oil in the gearbox. You have to be very careful and precise when doing this part of the job. Open the gearbox filler cap using a socket wrench and a 10mm Allen socket. Take a plastic tube. Insert the assembly into the filler hole. The gearbox level is adjusted by overflow. When oil flows from the filler hole, close the cap. Put the mudguard back in. Then screw the screws back on and put the Refit back in place. Put the crankcase back in. Then screw it back on. Grease the return lever guides. Then put it back onto the gear selector level. Put the locking clips back in place. Put the gearbox control cable holder back in place. Then screw the retaining nut back on, as well as the two screws. Put the two gearbox control ball joints back in place. Then lock them with the clips. Put the battery tray back in place. Then retighten the 3 retaining screws. You can now put the battery back in. Screw the battery fastening plate back on. Put the plastic trim back in place. Reconnect the battery. Put the cover back on. Reinstall the airbox. Put the air conduit and its clamping clip back in place. Reconnect the airflow meter. Put the air gap hose back in place. Put the air port and the airport cover back in place. Reinstall the engine cover. Put the wheels on your vehicle back on and lower it to the ground. Once the vehicle is on the ground, you can carry out the second driveshaft screw tightening phase by adding a torque angle. You can make visible marks on the screw on the rim to better visualize the movement of your spanner. Operation completed.
Hi, it's Theo from UseTool. I hope this video has helped you a lot in your car maintenance. We would be super grateful if you could spread the word so that we can produce even more tutorials. Simply give us a like, a comment, and hit that subscribe button. It really helps us boost the channel and help the whole community. Thanks a lot and have a great one.